The gunshot echoed through the cramped schoolhouse, just as Nora Adelaide was conjugating Latin verbs on the dusty chalkboard. And she knew without turning around that her teaching days in Rhyolite, Nevada, were about to take another complicated turn. "Miss Adelaide, there's been trouble at the Silver Queen Saloon," Deputy Morris gasped from the doorway, his weathered face flushed from running. The 12 children in her classroom twisted in their seats, eyes wide with that peculiar mixture of fear and excitement that only frontier children could muster. Nora set down her chalk with deliberate calm, smoothing the front of her modest gray dress. "Children, please continue copying the declensions from the board. I shall return momentarily." Her voice carried the precise diction that had been both her greatest asset and her most persistent curse since arriving in this dusty mining town 6 months ago in the spring of 1907. Outside, the Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on Rhyolite's Main Street, turning the scattered buildings into shimmering mirages. The town had exploded almost overnight when gold was discovered in the surrounding hills 4 years prior, and now it teemed with miners, merchants, and the usual assortment of dreamers and desperados that precious metals attracted like moths to flame. "It's nothing serious, miss," Deputy Morris assured her as they walked toward the saloon. "Just Thompson and his boys getting rowdy again. Fired a shot through the ceiling when the bartender cut them off, but the mayor wants the school closed for the day just to be safe." Nora's jaw tightened. This was the 3rd time this month that her lessons had been interrupted by the town's lawless element. She had come west from Boston with such high hopes, believing that frontier children deserved the same quality education as their eastern counterparts. Instead, she found herself fighting a constant battle against a community that viewed her education as an oddity at best and a threat at worst. "I understand, Deputy. Thank you for the warning." She dismissed the children early, watching as they scattered toward their various homes, some in proper houses but most in tents or ramshackle structures that passed for shelter in this boomtown. Then she walked the dusty road back to the boarding house where she rented a small room, her mind churning with frustration. Mrs. Pemberton, the boarding house keeper, was waiting on the porch with her usual expression of barely concealed disapproval. "Miss Adelaide, Mr. Chester Holbrook was here looking for you again." Nora suppressed a sigh. Chester Holbrook owned the largest general store in Rhyolite and had been courting her with increasing persistence since her arrival. He was respectable, reasonably prosperous, and utterly convinced that her education was a character flaw that marriage would cure. Did he say what he wanted? Just that he'd be back this evening. He seemed quite determined. Mrs. Pemberton's thin lips pressed together. "You know, dear, a woman in your position cannot afford to be too particular. Mr. Holbrook is a good catch, even if you do insist on filling your head with all those books." It was the same lecture Nora had heard 100 times, in 100 different variations, from people who could not understand why a woman would want to read Virgil in the original Latin, or discuss the philosophical implications of Kant's categorical imperative. Her own father, a professor at Harvard, had encouraged her intellectual pursuits until his death 3 years ago. Her mother had passed when Nora was just a child, leaving her to be raised in the academic atmosphere of her father's world. When he died, his colleagues had made it abundantly clear that there was no place for an educated woman in their circles, not as anything other than a curiosity or a cautionary tale. Teaching had seemed like the perfect solution. She could use her knowledge, help children, and support herself independently. But even that dream had proven more complicated than she had imagined. The school board in Boston had rejected her application, citing her lack of maternal warmth. Schools in New York and Philadelphia had similar concerns. Finally, a desperate advertisement from Rhyolite, Nevada had offered hope. They needed a teacher, and they needed one immediately. Nora had packed her books and her few belongings and traveled west, telling herself that the frontier would be different, that here her abilities would be valued over her gender. She had been wrong. "Thank you for the message, Mrs. Pemberton. I shall be in my room if anyone else calls." Her room was small but clean, with a window that overlooked the main street. Nora stood there for a long moment, watching the familiar chaos of Rhyolite unfold below. Miners stumbled between saloons, merchants hawked their wares, and somewhere in the distance, the stamp mills pounded ore with their rhythmic thunder. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her opportunity to prove that an educated woman could make a difference in the world. Instead, she felt more isolated than ever. A knock at her door came precisely at 6 o'clock. Nora opened it to find Chester Holbrook standing in the hallway, his carefully pomaded hair gleaming in the lamplight. He was a handsome man in his early 30s, tall and well-dressed by Rhyolite standards, and he knew it. "Miss Adelaide, how lovely you look this evening." Nora was still wearing the same gray dress she had taught in, and they both knew it. "Mr. Holbrook, what can I do for you?" "I was hoping you might join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant. There is something important I wish to discuss with you." Experience had taught Nora that refusing would only make him more persistent. She agreed, fetching her shawl and following him out into the cooling evening air. Rhyolite's streets were even more boisterous now that the sun had set, with piano music spilling from the saloons and raucous laughter echoing between buildings. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in town, which meant the tables had actual tablecloths, and the food was only occasionally inedible. Chester ordered for both of them without asking what Nora might want, then leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "I have been very patient with you, Miss Adelaide," he began. "I have courted you properly, respected your position as a teacher, and made my intentions honorably clear. I am prepared to offer you marriage and a comfortable home. As my wife, you would want for nothing." "That is very generous of you, Mr. Holbrook," Nora said carefully. "However," he continued, his smile fading slightly, "I must be frank with you. This constant reading and studying of yours would have to stop. A man needs a wife who can manage his household, not one with her nose perpetually stuck in some dusty book. I have seen the way you fill those children's heads with Latin and philosophy and all manner of impractical nonsense. As my wife, you would need to adopt a more suitable demeanor." There it was. The same ultimatum she had heard before, dressed up in slightly different words. "Choose marriage or choose your mind," as if the two could not possibly coexist. "Mr. Holbrook, I appreciate your offer, but I must decline. My education is not some frivolous hobby that I can set aside. It is a fundamental part of who I am." His face darkened. "You are 24 years old, Miss Adelaide. You are not getting any younger, and you have no family, no prospects beyond this shabby little teaching position. I am offering you security and respectability. What more could a woman in your position possibly want?" "Respect for my intelligence," Nora said quietly. "Partnership with someone who values my mind rather than asking me to diminish it. Is that truly so much to ask?" Chester's hand slammed down on the table, making the silverware jump. Several other diners turned to stare. "This is exactly the problem with educated women. You have been filled with romantic nonsense and unrealistic expectations. No man wants a wife who thinks herself his equal, who questions and debates and refuses to know her proper place." Nora stood, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Then I suppose I shall remain unmarried, because I will not make myself smaller to fit someone else's limited vision of what a woman should be. Good evening, Mr. Holbrook. She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, but her heart was racing. She had just publicly rejected the most eligible bachelor in Rhyolite, and she knew the consequences would not be pleasant. Small towns had long memories and sharp tongues. Sure enough, by the next morning, the entire town seemed to know about the incident. Nora could feel the stares as she walked to the schoolhouse, could hear the whispered comments that cut off abruptly when she passed. Mrs. Pemberton served her breakfast in stony silence, her disapproval radiating like heat from a stove. The school day itself was mercifully uneventful, but when Nora dismissed her students at 3 o'clock, she found Chester Holbrook waiting outside with 3 members of the school board. Her stomach sank. "Miss Adelaide," Chairman Morton said gravely, "we need to speak with you about your position here." They moved into the schoolhouse, and Nora stood before them like a defendant awaiting judgment. Chairman Morton cleared his throat importantly. "It has come to our attention that you have been teaching materials that are, shall we say, beyond the necessary scope for children in a mining town. Latin, philosophy, these are hardly practical skills. Education should expand the mind," Nora protested. "These children are just as capable of higher learning as any child in Boston or New York." "Perhaps," Morton conceded, "but that is not what this community needs. We need children who can read, write, and cipher well enough to conduct business. We do not need them filled with ideas above their station." Chester stepped forward, his expression smug. "Furthermore, Miss Adelaide, your rejection of my courtship has raised serious questions about your judgment and your commitment to becoming a proper part of this community. A school teacher should be a moral example, not a stubborn bluestocking who thinks herself too good for honest marriage." Nora's hands clenched at her sides. "My personal life has nothing to do with my teaching abilities." "On the contrary," Morton said, "a teacher must be above reproach. We have decided to place you on probation. You will teach only basic subjects, and you will refrain from encouraging the children, especially the girls, toward excessive education. Additionally, we expect you to reconsider Mr. Holbrook's generous offer. A married teacher would provide a much better example to the students." The injustice of it burned in Nora's throat, but she knew that arguing would only make things worse. She agreed to their terms through gritted teeth, and they filed out looking satisfied with themselves. Chester lingered for a moment. "This could all be resolved so easily, Nora. Just say yes. I would even let you keep a few of your books." "Get out," she said quietly. He shrugged and left, and Nora sank into her chair, fighting back tears of frustration. She had traveled 2,000 miles to escape this exact situation. And yet here she was again, being told that her mind was her curse rather than her gift. That evening, she could not bear the thought of returning to the boarding house and Mrs. Pemberton's judgmental silence. Instead, she walked out of town, following one of the trails that led into the hills. The desert landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all golden light and long shadows as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. She was so lost in her thoughts that she did not notice the rattlesnake until it was too late. The angry buzz of its rattle sent her stumbling backward, and her foot caught on a rock. She fell hard, her ankle twisting beneath her with a sickening wrench of pain. The snake, satisfied that the threat had been neutralized, slithered away into the rocks, but Nora could not stand. Her ankle was already swelling, and when she tried to put weight on it, pain shot up her leg like lightning. The sun was setting rapidly now, and Nora realized with growing panic that she was alone in the desert with an injured ankle and no way to get back to town. She tried calling for help, but her voice seemed to vanish into the vast emptiness around her. The temperature was already dropping, and she knew that the desert night would be brutally cold. She was trying to decide whether to attempt crawling back toward town when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. A rider appeared over the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light. As he drew closer, Nora could make out more details. He was tall and lean, sitting his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He wore worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes. "Madam, are you hurt?" His voice was deep and surprisingly gentle as he dismounted and approached her. "I twisted my ankle. I'm afraid I cannot walk on it." He knelt beside her, and she got her first clear look at his face. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with strong features weathered by sun and wind and eyes that were a striking clear gray. His hands, as he carefully examined her ankle, were calloused but careful. "It is swollen but not broken, I think. You should not be out here alone. These hills can be dangerous, especially at night." He stood and offered her his hand. "I am Zachary Miller. My ranch is about 2 miles north of here. Nora Adelaide. I teach at the school in Rhyolite." She let him help her to her feet, or rather to her foot, as putting any weight on the injured ankle was impossible. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Not well, but I can manage if necessary." "Necessary it is, I am afraid. It will be full dark soon, and this is no place to spend the night." He whistled sharply, and his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, trotted over. With surprising gentleness, Zachary lifted Nora and settled her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and Nora felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the proximity. "I apologize for the impropriety," she said stiffly. She felt rather than saw his smile. "Out here, staying alive matters more than propriety. Hold on." The ride to his ranch took longer than 2 miles should have, mostly because Zachary kept the pace slow and steady to avoid jostling Nora's injured ankle. As they rode, he asked about her teaching, and Nora found herself talking more freely than she had in months, describing her frustrations with the school board and the town's resistance to higher education. "They think I am filling the children's heads with nonsense," she said bitterly. "As if knowledge could ever be useless." "What do you teach them?" Zachary asked. "Reading, writing, arithmetic, of course, but also history, Latin, basic philosophy, and science when I can manage it. I want them to understand that the world is larger and more complex than this one desert town." "And they punish you for it?" It was not a question. Nora twisted in the saddle to look at him, surprised by the understanding in his tone. "You do not think I am being foolish, wasting my time on impractical subjects. I think intelligence is the most valuable thing a person can possess," Zachary said quietly. "Knowledge opens doors, creates possibilities. Anyone who would discourage learning is either a fool or afraid of what educated people might accomplish." Nora stared at him, momentarily speechless. In all her time in Rhyolite, no one had said anything remotely like that to her. "That is exactly what I believe, but everyone else seems to think education makes women unmarriageable and men too proud for honest work. Then everyone else is wrong." He said it with such simple certainty that Nora felt something warm unfurl in her chest. His ranch, when they reached it, was a modest affair. A small but sturdy house, a barn, a corral with several horses, and evidence of careful maintenance everywhere she looked. Zachary helped her down from the horse and supported her weight as they made their way to the house. Inside, the single room was clean and surprisingly well organized. What caught Nora's attention immediately, however, were the books. Shelves lined one entire wall, crammed with volumes on every subject imaginable. She recognized works of literature, history, science, and philosophy. It was the library of an educated man, and in a frontier ranch house, it was completely unexpected. "You read," she said unnecessarily, her eyes wide, voraciously. Zachary helped her to a chair and went to pump water into a basin. "My mother was a school teacher back in Kansas. She made sure I learned to love learning before she died. I have been adding to her collection ever since." He brought the basin over and gently eased Nora's boot off, then wrapped her swollen ankle in a cold compress. His touch was competent and impersonal, but Nora found herself acutely aware of him in a way she had never been aware of any man before. "Is that Virgil?" she asked, spotting a familiar spine on the shelf, the Aeneid. "Have you read it, in the original Latin? It is one of my favorites." Zachary's face lit up with genuine delight. "Mine as well, though I confess my Latin is rusty. I mostly read it in translation now." They fell into a conversation about literature and poetry, and Nora felt like she had been dying of thirst and had finally found water. Here was someone who understood, who valued the same things she did, who did not see her education as a flaw to be overcome. They talked for hours, ranging from Virgil to Shakespeare to the latest scientific discoveries, and Nora could not remember the last time she had been so happy. Finally, Zachary stood and stretched. "It is late, and you need to rest that ankle. You can take my bed and I will sleep in the barn." "I cannot possibly take your bed," Nora protested. "You can and you will. A gentleman does not let an injured woman sleep on the floor, and we have already established that out here. Practicality trumps propriety." He smiled at her, and Nora felt her heart do something complicated and entirely unprecedented. "I will ride into town first thing tomorrow and let people know you are safe. Is there anyone who will be particularly worried? Mrs. Pemberton at the boarding house, I suppose. And I should send word to the school that I will not be able to teach tomorrow. I will take care of it. Now, let me help you to the bed." Nora slept better that night than she had in months, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the dull ache in her ankle. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could hear Zachary moving around outside. She managed to hobble to the door and found him feeding the horses. "How is the ankle?" he called when he saw her. "Better. Still swollen, but less painful." "Good. I will ride to town now, but I will be back by noon. There is bread and cheese in the cupboard if you get hungry, and please, feel free to look at any of the books you like." He rode off, and Nora spent the morning in a state of contentment she had almost forgotten was possible. She browsed his bookshelves, finding treasures she had not read in years and new volumes she had never encountered. When Zachary returned, he brought not only news but also a basket from the general store. "Mrs. Pemberton was relieved to hear you are safe," he reported. The school board was less pleased. Apparently, Chairman Morton suggested that your accident was divine punishment for your prideful ways. Nora snorted. "Of course he did." "I also encountered Mr. Chester Holbrook, who seemed very concerned about your reputation given that you spent the night here unchaperoned." Zachary's expression was carefully neutral. He suggested rather strongly that you would need to marry him now to salvage your good name. "He would love that, would he not? Force me into marriage through scandal rather than courtship." Nora felt anger rising in her chest. "I suppose the whole town is talking about it. Undoubtedly. Small towns thrive on gossip." Zachary set the basket down and looked at her seriously. "Miss Adelaide, Nora, if I may call you that. I want you to know that I will make it clear to everyone that nothing improper happened here. Your reputation will not suffer if I can help it. You are very kind, but I suspect the damage is already done. The mere fact that I was here alone with you will be enough for people like Chester to use against me." "Then they are fools," Zachary said firmly. Any reasonable person would understand that rescuing an injured woman is the only decent thing to do, regardless of propriety. They spent the rest of the day together, and Nora found herself talking about things she had never shared with anyone. Her loneliness in Boston after her father died, her struggles to find a teaching position, her desperate hope that the West would be different. Zachary listened with complete attention, and when he shared his own story, she understood why he valued education so deeply. His mother had been a widow who supported herself and her son by teaching in a series of frontier schools. She had been brilliant and kind, and she had died of pneumonia when Zachary was 16. He had worked as a ranch hand for years, saving every penny until he could buy this small piece of land. The books had been his connection to his mother, his way of honoring her memory by continuing to learn and grow. She used to say that the mind is the only thing no one can take from you, Zachary said quietly. No matter how poor you are, or how hard life gets, what you know is yours forever. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. She would have liked you, I think. She always said that an educated woman was the most valuable partner a man could have, someone who could stand beside him as an equal in all things. The way he looked at her when he said it made Nora's breath catch in her throat. There was admiration in his eyes and something warmer, something that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. Over the next several days, as Nora's ankle healed, she found herself spending more and more time at Zachary's ranch. At first, it was simply because she could not walk the distance back to town, but soon she realized she did not want to leave. Here, in this small ranch house with its walls of books and its owner who valued her mind, she felt more at home than she had anywhere since her father died. Zachary seemed to feel the same way. He began timing his ranch work so that he could spend his evenings with her, and they would sit by the fireplace discussing everything from politics to poetry. He taught her about ranching and horses, showing a patience and enthusiasm that reminded her of her own teaching. She helped him improve his Latin, laughing when he stumbled over the more complex declensions, but encouraging him when he got them right. It was during one of these evenings, about a week after her accident, that things shifted between them. They had been debating the merits of different philosophers, and Nora had just made a particularly compelling argument for Kant when Zachary set down his book and looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Nora, I need to say something, and I hope you will forgive me if it is too forward." "What is it?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "I have never met anyone like you. Your intelligence, your passion for learning, your refusal to make yourself less just to fit others' expectations. You are extraordinary, and I find myself thinking that the men who rejected you were not just fools but the unluckiest men in the world." Nora felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Zachary, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I see you, truly see you, and I treasure every part of who you are, especially your brilliant mind." He hesitated, then continued. "I know we have only known each other a short time, but I feel as if I have been waiting my whole life to meet someone I could talk to like this. Someone who understands that knowledge and love and partnership can all exist together." "I feel the same way," Nora admitted. "These past days have been the happiest I can remember. When I am with you, I do not have to hide or diminish myself. I can just be who I am." Zachary crossed the small space between them and took her hand. "Then stay, not just tonight but always. I know it is fast, I know it is unconventional, but when something is right, why should we wait? Marry me, Nora, be my partner in all things. I promise I will never ask you to be anything less than who you are." Nora's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He pulled her close and kissed her, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. His arms around her were strong but gentle, and the kiss was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and searching and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Nora was breathless and smiling wider than she had in years. "We should talk practically for a moment," she said. "I have my teaching position to consider, and the scandal when people find out we are engaged." "There will be talk regardless of what we do," Zachary said practically. "But we can minimize it. I will speak to the preacher tomorrow about a quick but proper wedding. Once we are married, you can decide whether you want to continue teaching or not. It will be entirely your choice." "I would like to continue if possible. Those children deserve better than the limited education the school board wants to give them." "Then you shall continue. We will make it work somehow." He kissed her forehead gently. "I have some money saved. The ranch does well enough. We will not be rich, but we will be comfortable, and you will have the freedom to teach and read and study as much as you like." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming about the future. When Nora finally fell asleep in Zachary's bed, with him once again relegated to the barn, she felt a peace she had thought was impossible. For the first time in her life, she had found someone who loved her not despite her intelligence but because of it. The next morning, Zachary rode into Rhyolite to speak with Reverend Phillips about arranging a wedding. Nora stayed at the ranch, her ankle now healed enough to walk on but still not strong enough for the long journey to town. She spent the time writing a letter to the school board, informing them of her engagement and her intention to continue teaching after her marriage. When Zachary returned in the late afternoon, his expression was troubled. Nora felt her stomach sink. "What happened?" "Reverend Phillips will marry us. That is not the problem. But the town is in an uproar. Chester Holbrook has been spreading rumors about you, claiming that you seduced me to trap me into marriage, that you are a scheming woman using your education to manipulate men." Nora's hands clenched into fists. "That is absurd. If anything, he was the one trying to trap me." "I know that, and anyone with sense knows that. But Chester has influence in this town and he is using it. He has convinced the school board to dismiss you immediately. They claim that your behavior has been unseemly and that you are no longer a fit moral example for the children." The injustice of it took Nora's breath away. She had done nothing wrong. She had been rescued by a good man, had fallen in love with him, and was planning a proper marriage. But because she had refused Chester's proposal and had dared to be alone with another man, even under innocent circumstances, she was being punished. "They cannot do this," she said, though she knew it was futile. "Of course they could do this. They could do whatever they wanted." "There is more," Zachary said gently. "Chester has also filed a claim saying that I lured you to my ranch under false pretenses, and that the wedding should be stopped until a proper investigation can be conducted into my character and intentions. This is insane. He is using the law to harass us just because I rejected him. Yes, he is, and unfortunately, he has enough money and influence to make it stick, at least for a while." Zachary took her hands in his. "We have a choice to make. We can fight this, which could take weeks or even months, during which time you would have no income and your reputation would be further damaged. Or we can leave Rhyolite. I can sell the ranch. It will not bring much, but enough to start somewhere new." "I cannot ask you to give up your home," Nora protested. "You have worked so hard to build this place. This ranch is just land and buildings. You are my home now, Nora. Wherever we go together, that is where I belong." He cupped her face in his hands. "I will not let them break us. If we have to start over somewhere else, then that is what we will do. As long as we are together, as long as we have our books and our minds in each other, we have everything that matters." Nora felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. You would really do that? Give up everything here for me, in a heartbeat. You are worth more than 1,000 ranches, Nora Adelaide. You are my future, my partner, my equal in all things. I love you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that intelligence and learning and partnership between equals is not just possible but beautiful. I love you too, Nora whispered. So much it terrifies me. They held each other as the sun set outside, making plans for their new life. Zachary would sell the ranch to his neighbor, who had been wanting to expand his holdings for years. They would take the money and the books and travel to California, where mining towns were still growing and teachers were desperately needed. It would be a fresh start, away from Chester's vindictive influence and the small-minded prejudices of Rhyolite. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Zachary negotiated the sale of his ranch, getting a fair price from his neighbor who was decent enough to pay what the land was worth, rather than trying to take advantage of the situation. Nora packed her few belongings from the boarding house, enduring Mrs. Pemberton's lectures about her ruined reputation and her foolishness in rejecting a good man like Chester Holbrook. She tried to say goodbye to her students, but the school board had forbidden her from entering the schoolhouse. Instead, she stood outside one afternoon as the children were leaving and pressed small books into their hands, gifts from her own collection. To the girls especially, she whispered encouragement. Do not let anyone tell you that your minds are less valuable because you are female. You are just as capable of great things as any boy. Read, learn, question everything, and never make yourself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. Several of the mothers pulled their daughters away quickly, scandalized, but a few of the older girls hugged Nora tightly, tears in their eyes. We will miss you, Miss Adelaide, one of them said. You taught us that we could be more than we thought we could be. It was those moments that made everything worthwhile, Nora thought. Even if she had only reached a few children, even if the town saw her as a failure, she had planted seeds that might one day grow into something beautiful. The wedding took place quietly in Reverend Philip's small church, 3 days before they planned to leave Rhyolite. The only witnesses were the Reverend's wife and Zachary's neighbor, who had become a friend during the sale negotiations. It was not the grand ceremony Nora had sometimes imagined as a girl, but it was perfect in its simplicity. When Zachary slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and said his vows, looking into her eyes with such love and certainty, Nora knew she was the luckiest woman alive. I promise to honor your mind as much as your heart, Zachary said. To encourage your learning and growth, to stand beside you as an equal partner, and to love you with everything I am for as long as I live. Nora's own vows were equally heartfelt. I promise to treasure your kindness and value your partnership, to share with you all the joys of learning and discovery, to be your equal and your support, and to love you with all that I am for the rest of my days. When they kissed as husband and wife, Nora felt as if a weight she had been carrying her entire life had finally lifted. She was no longer alone. She had found her partner, her equal, her home. They spent their wedding night at Zachary's ranch, now sold but still theirs for a few more days. Zachary had prepared a simple but delicious dinner, and they ate by candlelight, talking and laughing like the old friends they had somehow become in such a short time. When they finally went to bed together for the first time as husband and wife, Nora discovered that physical intimacy with someone who truly loved and respected her was nothing like the frightening ordeal she had been led to expect. Instead, it was tender and joyful, an extension of the emotional connection they had already forged. Afterwards, lying in Zachary's arms, Nora felt completely at peace. "I was so afraid I would never find this," she murmured. "I thought I would have to choose between my mind and love, that I could not have both." "You should never have had to make that choice," Zachary said, stroking her hair. "The right person enhances all parts of who you are. They do not ask you to cut away pieces of yourself to fit their expectations." Chester could not understand that. None of them could. "Their loss is my infinite gain." He kissed her forehead. "I am the luckiest man alive, Nora Miller. I have a wife who can discuss philosophy and poetry, who challenges me to think deeper and learn more, who makes every day an adventure of the mind and heart." Nora smiled in the darkness. "Nora Miller, I like the sound of that." They left Rhyolite at dawn 3 days later, their belongings packed into a sturdy wagon Zachary had purchased with part of the ranch sale money. As they drove out of town, Nora looked back only once. She felt no regret, only relief. This place had never been her home. Home was beside her now, holding the reins, pointing the wagon west toward California and new possibilities. The journey took 3 weeks, following rough roads through Nevada and over the Sierra Nevada mountains. They traveled slowly, camping under the stars most nights, and Nora discovered that she loved the freedom of the open road. There was something liberating about leaving behind the constraints of town life, even temporarily. In the evenings, they would sit by their campfire and read aloud to each other from the books they had brought. Zachary's deep voice bringing poetry to life while Nora translated Latin verses into English. They met other travelers along the way, and Nora was struck by how different people were outside of established towns. Prospectors and settlers, wanderers and dreamers, most of them too focused on their own journeys to judge others. When they introduced themselves as a married couple heading west to start fresh, people nodded and wished them luck. Asking nothing more, one evening, they camped near another wagon, and the family traveling in it joined them for dinner. The father was a miner looking for work, and he had 3 daughters ranging in age from 6 to 12. When the girls shyly asked Nora if she knew any stories, she spent the evening teaching them about Greek mythology, watching their eyes grow wide with wonder at tales of gods and heroes. The mother pulled Nora aside before they parted ways the next morning. "Thank you for talking to my girls like they have brains. Most people act like girls are only good for cooking and cleaning." "Your daughters are bright and curious," Nora said warmly. "Encourage them to read and learn as much as they can. Education will give them choices in life." The woman nodded slowly. "I cannot read myself, and neither can their father, but maybe, if we find a good place to settle, we can make sure the girls get some schooling." "You have given me something to think about." It was a small moment, but it reminded Nora why teaching mattered so much to her. Every mind open to learning was a victory. Every girl shown that she could be more than what society expected was a step toward a better world. They finally reached California in late summer, and after exploring several small towns, they settled in a growing community called Auburn, nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Gold had been discovered here back in the early days of the rush, and while the easy pickings were long gone, the town had evolved into a stable community with farms and businesses alongside the remaining mining operations. The first thing Zachary did was find them a small house to rent, a neat cottage with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that got good light in the mornings. The second thing he did was visit the local school board to inquire about teaching positions. "They need a teacher," he reported back to Nora excitedly. "The previous teacher left to get married, and they have been struggling to find a replacement. I mentioned that my wife is highly educated and experienced, and they want to meet with you tomorrow." Nora felt a flutter of nervousness. What if they react the same way Rhyolite did? What if they think I am too educated, too unconventional? Then we will find somewhere else, Zachary said calmly. But I have a good feeling about this place, Nora. Auburn is more established than Rhyolite was, more stable. They have a library and a literary society. I think they might appreciate what you have to offer. He was right. The school board in Auburn consisted of 3 men and 2 women, all of them clearly dedicated to education. When Nora outlined her qualifications and her teaching philosophy, emphasizing her belief that all children deserved access to higher learning, they exchanged pleased glances. Miss Adelaide, Mrs. Miller, the board chairwoman, Mrs. Harrison, said warmly, "We have been hoping to find someone who could elevate our school beyond basic instruction. Many of our students come from families who value education and want their children to have opportunities beyond mining or farming. Your background is exactly what we have been looking for. You are not concerned that I might teach subjects some consider unnecessary?" Nora asked carefully. One of the male board members, Mr. Davies, smiled. "Mrs. Miller, this is California. We pride ourselves on being progressive. If you can teach our children Latin and philosophy alongside their reading and arithmetic, we will consider ourselves fortunate to have you." Nora felt tears pricking her eyes. After so much rejection and struggle, here were people who valued exactly what she had to offer. "Thank you. I promise you will not regret this decision." She started teaching 2 weeks later, and from the first day, she knew this was different. The students were eager and engaged, their parents supportive. When she introduced Latin, instead of complaints, she received requests from several mothers to know if she might offer evening classes for adults as well. The idea delighted her, and soon she was teaching twice a day, once for the children and once for a group of women who had never had the opportunity for higher education, but hungered for it now. Zachary supported her completely, taking over most of the household chores so she would have time to prepare lessons and grade papers. He also found work helping a local rancher who needed an extra hand, and his knowledge of horses and cattle quickly made him valuable. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. As autumn turned to winter and then to spring, Nora and Zachary built a life together that was everything they had hoped for. They made friends in Auburn, other couples who valued learning and conversation. They joined the literary society, where they spent evenings discussing books and current events with people who appreciated Nora's insights rather than being threatened by them. On their first anniversary, Zachary gave Nora a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said. "I know you have been talking about wanting to write down your educational philosophy. Perhaps you could develop it into something more, maybe even a book that could help other female teachers." "A book?" Nora's eyes widened. "Do you really think I could?" "I think you can do anything you set your mind to, my brilliant wife. Your ideas about education are important. They deserve to be shared with the world." Encouraged by his faith in her, Nora began writing in earnest. She detailed her experiences in Rhyolite and Auburn, contrasting the two approaches to education and arguing passionately for the importance of teaching all children, regardless of gender or class, to think critically and engage with complex ideas. Zachary read each chapter as she completed it, offering thoughtful feedback and endless encouragement. It took her 2 years to complete the manuscript, writing mostly in the evenings after her teaching duties were done. Zachary helped her research publishers, and they sent the manuscript to several companies in San Francisco and New York. The rejections came first, as they had expected, but they kept trying finally. A small but respected educational publisher in Boston expressed interest. They wanted to publish her book, believing it would appeal to the growing movement of women fighting for better educational opportunities. When the acceptance letter arrived, Nora cried with joy, and Zachary swept her up in his arms and spun her around their small kitchen. "I am so proud of you," he said, setting her down and kissing her soundly. "Your ideas are going to change lives, Nora, just like you changed mine." The book, published in early 1912 under the title Education Without Limits, A Teacher's Argument for Universal Learning, received positive reviews in several educational journals. It did not make them rich or famous, but it did establish Nora as a voice in the growing movement for educational reform. She began receiving letters from other female teachers across the country, thanking her for putting into words what they had been feeling, for giving them ammunition to fight against the limitations placed on their teaching. One letter in particular moved Nora to tears. It was from one of her former students in Rhyolite, now a young woman of 18 who had fought to continue her education despite her family's objections. She had just been accepted to the new Teachers College in San Francisco and wrote to thank Nora for inspiring her to pursue her dreams. "You showed me that being smart was not something to hide or be ashamed of," the girl wrote. "Because of you, I am going to become a teacher too, and I am going to teach girls that they can be anything they want to be. Thank you for being brave enough to be yourself." Nora showed the letter to Zachary through tears. This is why it all mattered. Every struggle, every rejection, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it to reach even one girl and show her that her mind matters. "You have reached far more than one," Zachary said gently. "And you will reach even more in the years to come." He was right. Over the next several years, Nora's reputation as an educator grew. She was invited to speak at teacher conferences, to write articles for educational journals, to consult with school boards that wanted to improve their curricula. Through it all, Zachary was her constant support, managing their household when she had to travel, celebrating her successes as if they were his own, and reminding her on difficult days why her work mattered. Their personal life grew richer as well. In the spring of 1913, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little fear. Nora worried about how a child would affect her teaching and writing, but Zachary was characteristically practical and supportive. "We will make it work," he promised. "Other women manage to be both mothers and teachers. We will find a way." Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy baby boy they named Thomas, after Nora's father. Holding him for the first time, Nora felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This tiny person was a product of her love with Zachary, a love built on mutual respect and shared values. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered to him. "Your father and I are going to make sure you grow up knowing that learning is a joy and that every person, regardless of gender or background, deserves the chance to develop their mind to its fullest potential." Zachary leaned over to kiss both of them. "He is perfect, Nora, just like his mother." Nora took several months away from formal teaching after Thomas was born, but she continued her writing and offered private tutoring from their home. Zachary proved to be a devoted father, just as involved in Thomas's care as Nora was. When friends expressed surprise at seeing him change diapers or rock the baby to sleep, he would simply say, "Why should my wife bear all the responsibility? Thomas is our son, not just hers." It was another way in which their partnership was different from the traditional marriages around them, and Nora loved him even more for it. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler, Nora gradually returned to teaching, though in a reduced capacity. The school board in Auburn was accommodating, allowing her to teach half-days so she could spend afternoons with her son. She also continued her evening classes for adult women, though now she often brought Thomas with her, letting the women take turns holding him while she lectured. Far from being a distraction, his presence seemed to inspire the women even more. "If you can be a mother and a teacher and a writer, then maybe we can pursue our own dreams too," one of her students said. "You show us it is possible." In 1916, Nora and Zachary welcomed their second child, a daughter they named Alina after Zachary's mother. With two small children, life became more hectic, but also fuller and richer. Their home was filled with books and laughter, with spirited debates between Zachary and Nora that the children listened to with wide eyes, learning early that thinking and questioning were valued activities. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Nora and Zachary would sit together on their porch, watching the sun set over the California hills. Sometimes they talked about their plans and dreams for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked one evening. "Leaving your ranch, giving up everything you had worked for?" Zachary looked at her in genuine surprise. "Not for a single moment. That ranch was just a place, Nora. What we have now, this is everything. You are everything." "I could not have done any of it without you," she said softly. "Your support, your belief in me when no one else believed. You saved me, Zachary, in more ways than just rescuing me from that hillside." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was lonely before I met you, Nora. I had my books and my ranch, but I did not have a partner, someone who understood me completely. You gave me that. You gave me a home in the truest sense of the word." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and Nora thought about how far they had both come. From that chance encounter in the desert to this moment, sitting on the porch of their home with their children sleeping safely inside, it had been a journey of love and growth and mutual respect. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and milestones. Thomas started school, proving to be as intellectually curious as his parents, constantly asking questions and devouring books. Alina followed in her brother's footsteps, though her interests leaned more toward science and mathematics, while Thomas loved literature and history. Nora and Zachary encouraged both children equally, making sure Alina knew that her mathematical abilities were just as valuable as her brother's literary talents. In 1920, when Nora was 36, she published her second book, a practical guide for teachers that outlined specific methods for teaching advanced subjects to students of all backgrounds. This book was even more successful than the first, and it led to an invitation to lecture at the Teachers College in San Francisco. Zachary accompanied her on the trip, and they spent a week in the city, attending lectures and cultural events, feeling very sophisticated and worldly. "Can you imagine if I had married Chester Holbrook?" Nora said one evening as they walked along the San Francisco waterfront. "I would have spent the last 13 years managing a general store in Rhyolite, my mind slowly atrophying from disuse." "I cannot imagine you accepting such a fate," Zachary said. "You would have found a way to break free eventually." "Maybe, but I am grateful I did not have to wait. I am grateful for that rattlesnake and my twisted ankle and the fact that you happened to ride by when you did." "The luckiest day of my life," Zachary agreed. They returned to Auburn renewed and energized, and Nora threw herself into her teaching with fresh enthusiasm. She also began mentoring young women who wanted to become teachers themselves, offering guidance and support as they navigated the challenges of pursuing education in a world that still often saw educated women as oddities. One of her mentees was a bright young woman named Sarah who reminded Nora strongly of herself at that age. Sarah had been rejected by several schools because administrators felt she was too opinionated and not sufficiently deferential. Nora took her under her wing, helping her refine her approach without dulling her sharp mind. "You do not have to make yourself smaller," Nora told her, "but you do have to be strategic. Save your boldest ideas for when you have established yourself and earned some trust. Once you are in the classroom with those children, you can teach them everything you want them to know." It was practical advice born of hard experience, and Sarah took it to heart. She eventually secured a position at a school in Sacramento and went on to have a distinguished teaching career, always crediting Nora with making it possible. In 1924, Nora and Zachary celebrated their 15th anniversary. Their children were growing into intelligent, kind young people who had inherited their parents' love of learning. Thomas, now 10, was already talking about going to university someday. Eleanor, at 8, had announced her intention to become a scientist and discover something important. "Where do we go right?" Zachary joked as they watched the children debate the relative merits of different scientific theories at the dinner table. "We treated them as intelligent beings from the start," Nora said. "We never told them they could not do something because of their age or gender. We just let them be who they are." That summer, they received unexpected news. The school board in Rhyolite had written to Nora, asking if she would consider returning to give a lecture on educational reform. The town had changed significantly in the years since they had left, the gold boom fading and the population stabilizing. The new school board wanted to improve their educational offerings and had heard about Nora's work. Nora was initially reluctant, not wanting to revisit a place that had treated her so poorly, but Zachary encouraged her to go. "It would be powerful," he said, "to return in triumph, to show them that their rejection did not destroy you but instead drove you to even greater things." In the end, Nora agreed. They made the journey back to Rhyolite with their children, turning it into a family adventure. The town looked smaller than Nora remembered, dustier and more worn. Many of the buildings she recalled were gone, victims of the declining economy. The lecture was held in the schoolhouse where Nora had once taught, and it was packed with people. She saw many familiar faces, including some of her former students, now young adults. She did not see Chester Holbrook, and when she asked quietly, she learned he had left town years ago after his store failed. Nora's lecture focused on the importance of providing quality education to all children, regardless of their background or their town's economic situation. She spoke passionately about the need to teach critical thinking alongside basic skills, to encourage girls as well as boys to pursue knowledge, and to value teachers who brought enthusiasm and innovation to their classrooms. When she finished, the applause was long and genuine. Several people came up to speak with her afterward, including Chairman Morton, who had led the school board that fired her. "Mrs. Miller, I owe you an apology," he said, looking genuinely regretful. "We were wrong to dismiss you the way we did. You were trying to give these children something valuable, and we were too narrow-minded to see it. I am glad to see you have thrived despite our foolishness." "Thank you for saying that," Nora said graciously. "I hope the school board here will be more open to innovative teaching in the future." "We will. Your lecture has given us much to think about." As they drove away from Rhyolite the next day, Nora felt a sense of closure. The town that had rejected her no longer had any power over her. She had built a good life, a meaningful career, and a loving family. She had proven that intelligence in a woman was not a flaw but a gift, and that the right partner would treasure it rather than trying to suppress it. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of work and love and family. Thomas went off to university in 1928, studying literature just as they had expected. Eleanor followed 4 years later, pursuing mathematics and physics. Nora and Zachary found themselves alone in their house for the first time in nearly 2 decades, and they rediscovered the quiet joy of each other's company without the constant demands of parenting. "We are not old," Zachary said one evening as they sat reading together. "But we are not young anymore either. How did that happen?" "Life happened," Nora said, setting down her book to smile at him. "A good life, a full life. I would not change a moment of it." "Neither would I." "Well, perhaps I would change the rattlesnake. That could have ended very differently." But it did not. Instead, it led to everything we have now. She crossed the room to sit beside him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. "We have been married 21 years, Zachary. 21 years of partnership and love and mutual respect. Do you know how rare that is?" "I know how lucky I am," he said, kissing her temple. "Every single day I know how lucky I am." In 1935, Nora retired from full-time teaching at the age of 51. She had spent nearly 3 decades in the classroom, touching countless lives and helping to change attitudes about women's education. The school bored through her a retirement party, and dozens of her former students came to pay tribute, sharing stories about how she had influenced their lives. "You taught me that my opinion mattered," one woman said. "That I did not have to just accept what I was told but could think for myself." "You showed me that being smart was nothing to be ashamed of," said another. "Because of you, I went to college and became a nurse. I have helped save lives because you taught me I was capable of more." Listening to these testimonials, Nora felt the satisfaction of a life well lived. She had made a difference, not through grand gestures but through the steady, patient work of teaching and mentoring and refusing to accept limitations placed on her by others. Retirement did not mean stopping work entirely. Nora continued to write, publishing several more books and articles over the years. She also volunteered at the local library, helping to expand its collection and organize reading groups. Zachary, who had slowed down his own work as he approached 60, joined her in many of these activities. They became fixtures in Auburn's cultural life, the educated couple who could always be counted on for stimulating conversation and generous support of educational initiatives. Their children thrived in their own careers. Thomas became a professor of literature, carrying on his grandfather's academic legacy. Eleanor earned a doctorate in physics and worked on important research projects, breaking barriers for women in science. Both married partners who respected their intelligence and ambition, and both credited their parents with showing them what a good marriage looked like. "You and Dad taught us that marriage should be a partnership of equals," Thomas told Nora during one visit home. "That the right person enhances who you are rather than diminishing it. That is what I looked for in Anne, and that is what I found." Eleanor echoed the sentiment. "So many of my female colleagues struggle with husbands who resent their careers or demand they choose between work and family. I never had to make that choice because you showed me it was possible to have both. You and Father built a life where you both could flourish." In 1942, Nora and Zachary celebrated their 30th anniversary. They threw a party for their friends and family. And as Nora looked around the room at all the people they had touched over the years, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, full life, had started with a chance encounter and a man who valued her mind. "Thank you," she whispered to Zachary as they danced slowly to music from the phonograph. "For what?" he asked, though his eyes were soft with understanding. "For seeing me. For treasuring my intelligence when everyone else saw it as a flaw. For building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Zachary said. "For taking a chance on a cowboy you barely knew. For trusting me with your brilliant mind and your beautiful heart." They kissed there in the middle of their crowded living room, and their children groaned good-naturedly while their friends applauded. It was a perfect moment, a crystallization of everything they had built together over 3 decades. The years grew quieter as they aged. Zachary's health began to decline in the late 1940s, his body worn down by decades of hard work. Nora cared for him tenderly, reading aloud to him when he was too tired to hold a book himself, discussing philosophy and literature just as they had done since the beginning. "I am not afraid," Zachary told her one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "I have had the most wonderful life, Nora. I have known love and partnership and the joy of watching our children grow into good people. I have no regrets." "Neither do I," Nora said, though her heart ached at the thought of losing him. "You have been my greatest blessing, Zachary Miller. My partner, my love, my home." He took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Promise me you will keep writing, keep teaching in whatever way you can. The world still needs your voice, your ideas. Do not let my death silence you." "I promise," she said through tears. Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1950, just a few months shy of their 38th anniversary. Nora grieved deeply, but not bitterly. They had been blessed with nearly 4 decades together, and every moment had been precious. At his funeral, she spoke about their love story, about how a chance encounter had led to a lifetime of partnership. "He treasured my intelligence," she said to the assembled mourners. "In a world that told women to be less, to know less, to want less, Zachary told me to be more. He encouraged my ambitions, supported my work, and never once asked me to diminish myself to fit some narrow idea of what a wife should be. That is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, and I will be grateful for it until my last breath." After Zachary's death, Nora threw herself back into her work, honoring his request that she continue her mission. She wrote one final book, a memoir about her life and career that became a bestseller and inspired a new generation of women to pursue their dreams despite societal obstacles. She also established a scholarship fund in Zachary's name to help young women pursue higher education, particularly those who showed promise in fields traditionally dominated by men. She lived to see Aliner's important contributions to physics recognized with prestigious awards. She attended Thomas's retirement party when he stepped down as department chair at the university where he had taught for 30 years. She welcomed grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom were encouraged to think critically and pursue knowledge with passion. When Nora passed away in 1962 at the age of 78, her obituary appeared in newspapers across the country. It detailed her contributions to educational reform, her groundbreaking books, and her lifelong advocacy for women's right to education and intellectual development. But what would have pleased her most was that it also mentioned Zachary, describing him as her devoted husband and partner who supported her work and shared her belief that intelligence was a treasure to be valued in all people. At her funeral, Aliner spoke about her mother's legacy. "She showed us that love and intellect are not opposing forces but complementary ones, that the right partnership enhances rather than limits. My father understood this, and together they built a life that proved it was possible to be fully yourself, fully loved, and fully engaged with the world. That is the gift they gave to all of us, and that is the example they left behind." Years later, when a women's college established a teaching program named in Nora's honor, they placed a plaque in the building that read, "Nora Adelaide Miller believed that every person deserves the opportunity to develop their mind to its fullest potential. She lived that belief, taught that belief, and found in Zachary Miller a partner who treasured her intelligence and supported her mission. May all who enter here find the same courage to pursue knowledge and the same joy in partnership between equals. It was a fitting tribute to a woman who had refused to be diminished, who had found love with a man wise enough to treasure her brilliant mind, and who had spent her life ensuring that future generations would have more choices than she had been given. Nora's story became part of the history of educational reform in America, a reminder that progress often comes from individuals who refuse to accept limitations and from partners who support each other's growth rather than fearing it. In the end, what had started with a rejection in a dusty Nevada mining town had transformed into a legacy that touched thousands of lives. Nora had been told she was too educated, too smart, too independent. But Zachary had seen those qualities and recognized them for what they truly were: treasures to be valued and nurtured. Together, they had proven that intelligence and love could coexist beautifully. That partnership between equals was not only possible, but the foundation for the richest kind of life. Their love story became legendary in Auburn, passed down through generations as an example of what marriage could be at its best. The little cottage where they had raised their family was eventually designated a historical landmark, and it stood as a testament to the power of mutual respect and shared values. Visitors would walk through the rooms where Nora and Zachary had lived and loved, where they had raised their children to value learning and equality, where they had spent countless evenings reading and talking and dreaming together. The books that had lined their walls were donated to the local library, where they formed the core of a special collection on education and women's history. Students researching the history of educational reform would find themselves drawn to Nora's story, inspired by her courage and persistence in the face of rejection and prejudice. In the decades after her death, as the women's movement gained momentum and began challenging many of the assumptions that had constrained Nora's generation, her writings found new relevance. Her books were reprinted and studied in universities, her arguments for equal education recognized as ahead of their time. Scholars wrote dissertations analyzing her work, and teachers incorporated her methods into their own classrooms. But beyond the academic legacy, beyond the historical significance, what endured was the simple truth at the heart of Nora and Zachary's story. Love at its best is not about one person diminishing themselves for another. It is about two people who see each other clearly, value each other completely, and build a life where both can flourish. It is about finding someone who treasures your mind as much as your heart, who celebrates your strengths rather than fearing them, who stands beside you as an equal partner in all things. That was the real treasure Nora and Zachary had found in each other during that chance encounter in the Nevada desert so many years ago. And it was a treasure that enriched not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone they touched, rippling outward through generations in ways they could never have fully anticipated. Their love story was a reminder that the right person will never ask you to be less than you are, and that intelligence, when recognized and valued, is indeed one of life's greatest treasures.